Okay. Welcome to the Philosophy 2400 Roundtable discussion on substance dualism. My name is Sean McNamara. I am joined today by Avery O'Neill, Christina Olenikov, and Alice McIntyre.
Hello.
So just to give you an idea of what we're doing today on the program, we're going to first talk about what is substance dualism, because you can't really have a conversation about a topic without defining its parameters and what it means and all that. Then we're going to talk about why it's important. And then we're going to talk about why it's not true, or maybe it is. And then we'll wrap up with another section on just a different cultural perspective and maybe a practical application for what substance dualism can mean in a different field. And then we'll conclude for real with a bonus section if you feel like watching more than 15 minutes of us, because we timed this out, where we actually have a discussion on our own thoughts of substance dualism and pluggables, as they say on other shows. So I'm going to throw over to Gallus here, who's going to tell us what substance dualism is.
All right. So substance dualism is an ancient theory in philosophy which asserts that the mind and its properties are immaterial and by virtue of this distinct from the material body and brain. So while this distinction applies foundationally to the dualist paradigm, there are a number of variations to dualism. One of these is Descartes' interactive substance dualism, which entails a sort of two-way causation between mental events and bodily events. So in this view of dualism, the mind and body are intimately related in that physical actions and occurrences impact mental events and vice versa. So and an example of this could be your feelings of anxiety, which would constitute a mental event, causes you to leave the room, which is a physical event. And that's just one of many examples. So while substance dualism has obvious areas of concern, like the lack of empirical evidence that the immateriality of the mind relies upon, it also provides an explanation for the vast capabilities of the mind, and these would include thought, emotion, and other capabilities that we would consider to be strictly characteristic of the human mind. So many people have tried to argue for the plausibility of substance dualism, but few are as interesting as Leibniz's Ant-Man experiment, which involves your conception of an ant-sized man who makes a trip into the human brain. So the thought experiment follows a human who gets shrunk down to the size of an ant, and he's then inserted into the human skull. So this being, creatively referred to as Ant-Man, starts crawling around, and given its human intelligence, it's able to recognize what it sees as blood vessels, gray tissue, and other physical constructs within the brain. But she says that because Ant-Man isn't going to see any of the mind's distinctive complex activities like its biases, phobias, aspirations, and the like, that this is somehow supportive of the presence of an immaterial mind. I've always found the idea of an immaterial substance untenable, just due to my sentiment that just because something can't be explained empirically doesn't mean it isn't empirically related or it isn't an empirical process. So, given this, I read his argument not as an argument for the immaterial mind, but for the possibility of non human consciousness. If Leibniz reasons that because Ant-Man can't see the processes of the mind during his tour, and because of this, the immaterial mind exists, the same argument should, in theory, be applicable insofar as to assign complex mental abilities to non-human things. If the ant were to be put inside a monkey, for say, he would likely obtain a similar result. The difference is that we as humans all agree that we're capable of these complex mental abilities, while we aren't convinced that this is also the case for a monkey. And the same cannot be said of a monkey because we can't see into their subjective experience, so we can't take this for granted of them as we can do for one another. But it is a fact that Ant-Man would see roughly the same thing if he were to enter a monkey brain as he would with ours. If we make the conclusion for an immaterial mind in the human case, then we have to at least consider we ought to do the same for the monkey or for other entities, whether they be animals or even machines. But dualists like Leibniz and Descartes, as Avery will talk about, rely on dualism to account for these abilities and maintain that they are uniquely human.
Yeah, I completely agree. So, what you said about Descartes was the first philosopher to formally philosophize substance dualism, and it was positively received for many reasons. Plato, even in his time, somehow supported substance dualism with some of his ideologies, one including the prenatal existence, which is that our souls lived before our bodies did. So yeah, this is one of the reasons that substance dualism wasn't completely disagreed upon. It also maintained cohesion with the common religious views of the day, that the mind itself was separate from the body. In the Christian religion, we can see that this ideology is present with the notion of heaven and hell, because when an individual dies, their body will decay, but their soul will go on to live in the afterlife. And the soul is what many philosophers would deem mental capabilities, such as personality, biases, phobias, as Gallus said. And so from this assumption, you can assume that many practicing Christians would believe in substance dualism. To reach this paradise, their soul must be separated from their material body. And in 17th century France, when Descartes first came forward with substance dualism as a theory, it was a predominantly Christian society. And you can see this ideology in many different monotheistic religions, which is the concept of this afterlife that the soul goes on to live. And I think a lot of religions use this concept as a method of payback for their devotees, or a tale of eternal damnation where the soul would live forever on in hell. And substance dualism is so common because it didn't go against the core values of millions of people in their religions. Substance dualism matters because it allowed people to make sense of their lives by applying it to religion and working hard and being a good person to earn this place in this paradise. Substance dualism was also important for laying the groundwork for future philosophical challenges. Descartes honed in on substance dualism in the 17th century, and he would not even estimate the huge scientific discoveries that would render his philosophy somewhat problematic. And this is when the argument between property dualism and substance dualism is necessary, because if one theory was unequivocally true and checked all the boxes, our search for knowledge of this world and after this life would cease to exist. And I believe in the case of philosophical matters, the search for knowledge is more rewarding than the knowledge itself. And knowing the full truth of what may or may not lie after Earth could result in catastrophe for the population on Earth. So I have two questions. Would concrete knowledge of an afterlife disincentivize individuals from confronting and overcoming adversity when they know that there is another realm present outside of our view? Or on the other hand, with the knowledge of the singularity of our existence and the absence of an afterlife, would this deteriorate our society into rampant hedonism with the absence of morality? And so, although substance dualism is an outdated theory, it's one that millions subscribe themselves to daily. And so, for pure order, it should be appreciated, because without it, I believe millions on Earth would feel cheated and damned to an afterlife of insignificance.
It's actually very interesting that you said that substance dualism allows society, particularly like religious people, to have a moral compass and keep peace or like do good, since they believe in an afterlife where the soul exists past kind of the body's shelf life. And you actually mentioned that multiple religions follow substance dualism kind of unknowingly, meaning that they believe in a consciousness that is immaterial interacting with a material body. However, that's really difficult to understand, since our perception of interactionism is strictly, physical. There's a real problem in substance dualism, one that actually Princess Elizabeth pointed out in her correspondence with Descartes himself, where the question was, how can something immaterial with no physical property, no location in the physical world, interact with the physical world and actually make changes to it? So as substance dualism explains it, if we can conceive of being with no consciousness that's identical to a conscious being, for example, a human, consciousness is separate from the physical body. And while that's plausible, we can't really conceive of an immaterial thing interacting with a material substance, as it's never occurred in our world, which is why it's almost unbelievable that an immaterial soul that is separate from the body can so can so interact with physical beings and the physical world around us. And these interactions kind of go beyond ourselves. They can occur between conscious beings as well. So for example, we can know what others think and feel and imagine through our perception of their mental state. And for example, we can act along in an improv class and pick up on different social cues and understand someone's mood or hidden message with, a simple glance of the eye. Yet somehow this is all done with no known link between the immaterial and material spheres. Even whole civilizations have, experienced similar fables and tales of monsters and have put in place similar values with no real connection to one another other than maybe a conscious one. And while this all could be true, the conscious connection between immaterial and material is almost impossible to justify, which is really the problem with substance dualism.
Yeah, and like that's a fascinating point you raise. So initially, I wanted to refute the argument of substance dualism, and then kind of came to the realization that that was maybe a little bit of a fool's errand, in the sense that I believe maybe there's a synthesis between substance dualism and physicalism. So that's what I'm going to talk about here. And I will do so by talking about Siddhartha Gautama, aka the Buddha's discourse on the characteristic not self. Okay, so essentially the Buddha's argument here is that both the body and mind are in a constant state of flux, and there is no physical location within either the mind or the body in which the self physically exists. Therefore, there is no unified self. So I need to point out that this is not a denial of the existence of self, rather an argument for the existence of a non-permanent self or mind. So within the Buddhist framework, the self is actually not one thing, it's 5 aggregates. So the first being the body, the second being feelings, both physical and emotional, third, perception and thoughts, fourth, propositional attitudes, and 5, consciousness. And note that of these 5 aggregates, Western philosophy's conception of the mind is actually represented within 4 different categories. So it isn't just some unified thing. So I have here a excerpt from the Milinda that is a dialogue between a Buddhist monk, Nagasena, and a king explaining reincarnation, basically. Okay, so the king says, "He who is born Nagasena, is he the same person or another? Neither the same nor another. Give me an illustration. In the case of a pot of milk that turns first to curds, then to butter, then to ghee, it would not be right to say that the ghee, butter, and curds were the same as the milk, but they have come from that. So neither would it be right to say that they are something else." So essentially, there is some sort of energy within you that gets reborn, but your consciousness and mind ceases to exist when you die, because there is no unified self. So an application of this, I could think of, comes from the realm of psychotherapy, because that's the realm I want to go into after school is over, or not over, just beginning. So you can find those examples in both the internal family systems model of therapy as well as part psychology. Both argue that the mind is made up of multiple parts. The internal family systems argues that we're born with them. Part psychology argues that they are created in response to life events. And parts are defined as discrete autonomous mental systems that have an idiosyncratic range of emotions, style of expression, set of abilities, desires, and worldviews. So an example of that is a part of you that protects you from danger, like fight or flight response. That would be a part of your mind taking over and telling you how to react to a certain situation. So IFS focuses on managing parts, whereas part psychology emphasizes working in collaboration with your different parts to resolve an issue. So essentially in both, the definition of self comes from getting to know different aspects of the self. So there's no unified self, just different parts. And that's very frustrating when a therapist tells you that, I tell you what, but it is. Okay, so what I've done here is present ideas and applications that challenge the idea of a unified self. So my thinking is, if there's no coherence in our internal ecosystem, then what does that mean for substance dualism? I think that dualism, at least to me, exists in a physical realm rather than a cosmic realm. So that kind of concludes my section here and the official section of this program. So now we're just going to have about 5 minutes, if you want to keep watching, where we just kind of talk about our ideas and just have a less formal discussion of substance dualism. So who wants to get the ball rolling here?
Well, I mean, what I said about kind of having a hard time grasping, you know, how exactly this immaterial soul mind of ours directly interacts with our bodies. And there was talk in previous lectures and stuff about, you know, is it God helping us, whether making our wishes come true and, you know, moving us to a McDonald's, or if it's a pineal gland. Well, we found out that that actually wasn't true. All of this kind of makes it hard to, you know, follow along with substance dualism. And I feel like a better, more middle ground philosophy is the more recently discussed property dualism. And I feel like some of our kind of collective thoughts fall, I feel like, in property dualism.
Sure. As a science student, it's definitely easier for me to believe scientists instead of philosophers, just because it's based on just research and all the technology that is in our lives. So yeah, I do understand the substance dualism, and I think it's a lovely thought
Yes.
that our souls and what makes us human is not just numbers and code and molecules interacting together, but the reality of it is that we know all of this neuroscience in these recent years that makes substance dualism a really hard concept to nail down. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I kind of come from the same frame of thought on this too, because like my interests are certainly more in the realm of the mind, and we do exist in an era when we know more about the human brain than we ever have in human history, which is awesome. Um, and like for me, I do can subscribe more to the Buddhist model of philosophy, where there is no physical location within our body where a soul exists, and I do think a lot of our mental processes are just a beautiful accident of nature, almost, of just synapses firing in the right way to give us this thing we call consciousness and a soul. And
Right.
it's incredible. The universe is an incredible place and has created a lot of amazing things. And yeah, so I think I do firmly fall somewhere in the middle, that I do believe there is something to us, like an energy or something, but I don't necessarily believe in the existence of a soul. It's a complicated place to be.
Yeah, I feel like
I'm sure a question I'll be grappling with for a long time in my life.
for sure, existential, no. But I feel like yeah, substance dualism does have a lot of faults, but believing that you know, the soul kind of continues on and there's more to life than just our time on earth now, I feel like that's a very promising belief. Even maybe that there is no, you know, proof to it. There's a lot of faith in that, I feel like, and that not only for me, I feel like a lot of people use that to kind of push themselves forward. And even if you know, we have to make our life meaningful on earth now, I feel like there's still a belief that if there's something more to life after, it just makes the world and I guess the universe that much more interesting and intricate, and kind of just going from one place to another, not necessarily kind of, I feel like in my eyes, devalues my life now, but makes, you know, the next possibility of life just that much more interesting.
The
Yeah,
best
exactly.
is that
I'm sorry,
we
go ahead.
don't know. Sorry, I was just saying, like, we can talk about it as much as we can beat this dog to death, but we will
Wow.
not. Absolutely. And yeah, I find that that's the best part.
Yeah, and I mean, like when we're talking about substance dualism too, like we're not talking about an idea of philosophy that's like particular. Well, I mean, it's obviously polarizing because we all have different ideas on this, but like, it's not something that creates violence in the real world or anything. Like, well, unless you want to get into religious violence, which I don't right now. But like overwhelmingly, the people that subscribe to this, as Avery was saying, like unconsciously as part of religion, like if believing in substance dualism gives someone comfort and makes them feel good about their lives, then by all means keep believing it. Like that's awesome. And I'm jealous to a degree that you know, you have that degree of certainty and spiritual coherence or congruence. I don't know what I want to say, but yeah, it's a beautiful thing. And if you believe it, that's amazing, and keep it up. Keep it up.
Yeah. Same could be said for literally any religion that believes in an afterlife. It's just comforting, obviously.
Yeah, exactly. The world's shitty, hard, and complicated. Like,
Exactly.
you know, if believing you're going to be happy after, that's, you move on to whatever's next. Helps you. Yeah, that's great.
All right, so
Yeah,
I believe
cool.
that's all of us wrapped up.
Cool. Let's plug our pluggables, I guess. You can follow me absolutely nowhere because I do not like social media. Well, I guess you could follow me on the bus, but I don't think I'd appreciate that very much. Yeah, so wrapping up our discussion here, I'm Sean. I've got Avery, Christina, and Callis all together. This was a lot of fun chatting with you guys today. And yeah, I look forward to doing it again when we have our essays and talk about all this stuff.
Likewise.
And
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. See you guys.
See
Nice
you.
talking.
Yeah.
That